The shift was almost imperceptible, like the change in wind direction before a storm. The whispers didn't come in the form of official pronouncements or grand speeches. They arrived on the backs of tired horses, carried by men who, like Elias, had previously been focused solely on the yield of their land and the health of their livestock. The fallow ground was stirring. The first true whisper arrived with the local itinerant blacksmith, old Mr. Hemlock, who traveled the inland settlements repairing tools and spreading news. He had just returned from a trip near Springfield, where he'd witnessed a public protest. "They burned a stack of tea," Hemlock reported, his voice low and conspiratorial as he hammered a new edge onto Elias's plowshare. Sparks flew, mirroring the heat of the gathering discontent. They didn't stop there. They read aloud from a pamphlet, a fierce thing. Elias, holding the iron steady on the anvil, felt the vibrations through his hands. A pamphlet? What did it say? It spoke of natural rights, of the king being a tyrant and Parliament being a den of thieves. It spoke of a new word, Elias: independence. The word hit Elias with a jolt. Independence. It was a concept far more profound and terrifying than a mere tax protest. It implied an unmaking of the world as he knew it, a tearing away from the established order he had always fundamentally respected. He tried to dismiss it, to argue that it was radical talk from firebrands, but the seed had been planted. The real shift in Elias's mindset began not with the grand, abstract concept of independence, but with the specific, tangible details of injustice. The ongoing policies, the duties on goods, the restrictions on westward expansion, and, crucially, the ability of British officials to operate outside the jurisdiction of local colonial law started to take on a new, sinister coherence. They were no longer administrative errors. They were calculated acts of subjugation. The pamphlets kept coming. Josiah Grant, Elias's restless neighbor, acquired a copy of John Dickinson's Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania, and later illegally printed copies of writings by Sam Adams. They were discussed in the hushed, warm confines of the local tavern, not over pints of ale, but over careful, measured cups of coffee. Tea was now considered a protest symbol. "Look at the logic, Elias," Josiah argued one evening, tracing the fine print of the smuggled document with a dirt-stained finger. "We are Englishmen. We have rights. The greatest right is the right to consent to the laws that govern us. If we are not represented in Parliament, then Parliament has no legal claim to govern us. It is simple logic applied to our lives." This wasn't the rabble-rousing Elias had expected. It was reason, sharp and clear. It resonated deeply with his innate sense of fairness, the same sense that made him meticulously measure his seed and pay his honest debts. If the contract was broken, if one party ceased to hold up its end, was the other not free to walk away? The whispers grew louder, fueled by a specific incident that brought the distant conflict right to the doorstep of Harmony Creek, the Corcoran crisis. A small company of redcoats, detached from the main force in Boston, was rerouted inland. Their official purpose was to patrol the western edge of the colony and discourage disloyal assemblies. Their true purpose, everyone knew, was to intimidate. Under the provisions of the Quartering Act, these soldiers, 24 strong, were billeted not in military barracks, for none existed in Harmony Creek, but in the homes of the villagers. Elias and Sarah found themselves hosting a young lieutenant, a stiff, polite man named Alastair Finch, and 2 of his junior corporals. The presence of the soldiers was an immediate, stifling intrusion. The men were professional, but they carried their authority like a heavy cloak. Lieutenant Finch took over the parlor for his office, demanding silence during his working hours. His corporals commandeered the smokehouse for their supplies, forcing Sarah to hang her winter meat elsewhere. Elias tried to maintain his composure. He was a host, they were guests, however unwelcome. He tried to see them as men doing their duty, but their presence was a constant grinding friction against the fabric of his freedom. They consumed his stored food, they depleted his dwindling woodpile, and worst of all, they occupied the intimate space of his family life. One cold afternoon, Elias found his 9-year-old son Thomas standing frozen in the kitchen doorway, tears streaming down his face. A corporal, carelessly cleaning his musket, had ordered the boy out of the room sharply, accusing him of nearly tripping over the military equipment. "He ordered me, Pa," Thomas whispered, clutching his father's leg. "In my own house." That was the spark. It wasn't the tax on paper, the duty on tea, or the abstract political theories. It was the humiliation of his child in the sanctity of his own home. It was the realization that the king's law was now an authority that could violate the most basic, fundamental right, the right to control his own hearth. This understanding solidified Elias's core motivation, the defense of the physical space and moral integrity of his home and family, rooted in the belief that local self-governance was essential for human dignity. The next day, Elias did something he had never done before. He left his plow in the field and walked straight to Josiah Grant's house. He didn't mention the corporal or Thomas. "Josiah," Elias said, his voice steady but low, "that pamphlet you read, the one about the committees, where do we meet and what do you need me to do?" Josiah's eyes, usually dancing with feverish excitement, softened with a profound understanding. He didn't ask why Elias had finally come. He knew the king's men had done the convincing. "We meet by the old mill, after dark, tonight. The work is quiet, Elias. We start by counting those who believe the time of talk is over." Elias shook his hand. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like signing an oath with invisible ink. He was no longer just Elias Vance, farmer of Harmony Creek. He was in a quiet, hesitant way a participant in the coming conflict. He had answered the whisper of liberty, and the sound of his own feet walking toward the mill that evening was the first step on a road from which there could be no easy return. The age of patience was over. The age of resolution had begun.